My daughter announced to everyone Dad passed away last month, so he won't be walking me down the aisle. But when I stepped through those country club doors in my dress uniform, the wedding guests froze like they'd seen Lazarus himself. Bridget went white as her wedding dress, then grabbed the nearest thing, a dinner roll, and hurled it straight at my head. But when I took that microphone, 200 people started weeping. Not from grief, but from the truth I was about to reveal. Before we continue Patty's story, if you appreciate tales about family honor and standing up for what's right, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's see how a retired firefighter from Southie fought for his dignity. The afternoon sun was slanting through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor of my little row house on East 3rd Street. At 64, I'd settled into the quiet rhythms of retirement. Morning coffee with the Herald, afternoon walks to St. Patrick's for evening mass, and evenings watching the Red Sox with a cold bud. 3 years since I'd hung up my helmet at engine 17, and the silence still felt strange after 40 years of sirens and shouting. I was washing my lunch dishes when the black BMW pulled up to my curb with a screech that echoed down the narrow street. The engine's purr was expensive foreign, nothing like the pickup trucks and old sedans that belonged in this neighborhood. Through the window, I watched my daughter Bridget climb out her heels, clicking on the cracked sidewalk like gunshot. She looked every inch the successful PR executive she'd become. Tailored navy blazer pearls at her throat hair pulled back in that severe bun that screamed control. Designer sunglasses hid her eyes, but I could read the tension in her shoulders, the way she adjusted her purse strap twice before walking up my front steps. "Dad," she said when I opened the door, not bothering with hello. Her voice carried that clipped Boston accent she'd worked so hard to cultivate, scrubbing away any trace of Southie from her vowels. "Bridget." I stepped aside to let her in, noting how she avoided looking at the framed photos of her mother lining the hallway. "This is a surprise. Coffee. I can't stay long." She perched on the edge of my recliner like she might catch something from the worn fabric. "The wedding's in 2 weeks, and we need to talk." I settled into my usual spot on the couch, the springs creaking familiar complaints. "Sure, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She pulled an envelope from her purse. Thick cream paper with gold embossing. "Wedding invitation." But instead of handing it to me, she held it like a shield between us. "Look, Dad, I've been thinking about the guest list," and she paused, gathering herself like she was about to deliver bad news to a client. "I don't think you should come." The words hit me like a blast from a house fire, sudden searing, stealing the breath from my lungs. "What do you mean Alex's family there?" She waved a manicured hand, searching for words. "They're old Boston, Beacon Hill Society. The venue is the Beacon Hill Country Club. Crystal chandeliers, waitstaff, and white gloves, chamber music. You'd stick out like a sore thumb in your old suit. I raised you, Bridget, alone after your mother died." My voice stayed steady, though my hands were starting to shake. "I worked double shifts to pay for that fancy college, sold my truck to cover your graduation party." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes at me. "Dad, please, that was years ago. This is my life now, my future. I can't have you embarrassing me in front of Alex's family." As her BMW disappeared around the corner, I stood there holding that cream-colored invitation, my hands shaking not from age, but from something I hadn't felt since the day Kathleen died. Pure, burning rage. I stood there in my empty hallway for what felt like hours, that invitation burning in my hands like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The daughter who'd just driven away in that fancy car. When had she become such a stranger? I walked slowly to the living room, my legs suddenly feeling every one of my 64 years. On the mantel above the fireplace, Kathleen smiled back at me from our wedding photo, 25 years old, in her grandmother's lace dress, eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that makes you believe anything is possible. Next to it, a picture of 3-year-old Bridget on my shoulders at the St. Patrick's Day parade, her chubby fists waving a tiny Irish flag. "What would you think of her now, Katie?" I whispered to my wife's photograph. The cancer had taken her 12 years ago, but I still talked to her picture every night before bed. Old habits of the heart, I suppose. I sank into my recliner, the leather worn smooth from years of evening news and Red Sox games. Memories flooded back unbidden. Kathleen rushing around this very living room the morning of Bridget's first communion, trying to tame our daughter's wild red curls with bobby pins and hairspray. "Hold still, Bridgie." Kathleen had laughed, her voice carrying that musical lilt that never quite left despite 40 years in Boston. "You want to look beautiful for Jesus and your daddy, don't you?" 6-year-old Bridget had giggled and squirmed. "Daddy says I'm always beautiful, Mama." even with bedhead. And I did think she was beautiful. Still did, if I was being honest. But something had changed in the years since we buried her mother in Mount Calvary Cemetery. The bills had piled up during Kathleen's illness. Even with the firefighter's insurance, the experimental treatments had drained our savings. I'd sold my truck, picked up overtime shifts, even took a part-time job at Sullivan's Hardware on weekends. But I'd kept my promise to Kathleen. The night before she died, she'd gripped my hand with what little strength she had left. "The insurance money, Patty," she'd whispered. "Half goes to Bridget's education fund. The other half." She'd smiled then, that same smile from our wedding photo. For her wedding day, every little girl deserves to feel like a princess. I'd kept that promise religiously. Bridget got her marketing degree from Emerson College. $45,000 that could have bought me a new truck and fixed the roof. When she graduated magna cum laude and hugged me at the ceremony, tears streaming down both our faces, I'd thought it was all worth it. But now, sitting in my quiet house, with that elegant invitation mocking me from the coffee table, I wondered when she'd started seeing her old man as an embarrassment instead of a source of pride. My phone buzzed. A text message. "Bridget, probably feeling guilty. Sorry for being harsh, Dad. It's just a stressful time. Alex's parents are very particular about appearances." "You understand, right?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. Understanding was one thing. Being erased from your daughter's life was something else entirely. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out the bottle of Jameson I kept for special occasions or emergencies. This felt like both. As the Irish whiskey burned my throat, I made a decision that would have made my old firefighter buddies proud. If Bridget wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real Irish wake looked like. The next morning came gray and drizzly, typical Boston spring weather that matched my mood perfectly. I was nursing my second cup of coffee and a splitting headache from the Jameson when the phone rang. The old rotary phone on the kitchen wall. Kathleen had insisted we keep it because it has character Patty, O'Malley residence. "Patty O, thank the saints you're alive," Molly Sullivan's voice crackled through the receiver, thick with tears and confusion. Molly had been Kathleen's best friend since childhood, a fixture at our Sunday dinners for over 30 years. "Of course I'm alive, Molly." "What kind of greeting is that?" I laughed, but something cold settled in my stomach. But Bridget said, "Oh, Patty, I've been praying for your soul for 3 days straight. I even had Father Murphy say a mass for your eternal rest." Her voice broke on the last words. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the linoleum. Brown liquid splashed across my slippers, but I barely noticed. "Molly, what exactly did Bridget tell you?" She called Tuesday night, crying her eyes out. "Said you'd had a heart attack at home, died instantly." Poor thing was beside herself, talking about how she'd have to plan the wedding without you there to walk her down the aisle. Molly's breathing hitched. "She said you'd want her to go through with it, that it's what you and Kathleen would have wanted." My vision blurred around the edges. Heart attack. Died instantly. The kitchen walls seemed to close in around me like a burning building. "Patty, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed, though my voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Molly, I need to ask you something important." "Who else knows about this?" "Well, I called the Flanagan sisters and Mary Costello from the parish council. We organized a meal train for Bridget. Figured she'd need help with funeral arrangements and wedding planning. Oh, honey, we sent flowers to the house. When no one answered, we thought maybe you were being waked somewhere else." After I hung up, my hands shaking like autumn leaves, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, trying to process what I'd just learned. My daughter hadn't just uninvited me from her wedding. She'd killed me off completely. I spent the next hour calling people back, explaining to confused neighbors and concerned parishioners that reports of my death had been greatly exaggerated. Each conversation felt like resurrection, bringing me back from a grave I'd never dug, but it was Margaret Murphy's words that cut deepest. "Oh, Patty, we were so worried when we heard. But at least now Bridget can have her fairy tale wedding without, well, you know." "Without what?" "Without her embarrassing father dragging down the proceedings." That afternoon I did something I'd never done before. Tried to figure out Facebook on Kathleen's old laptop. It took me 20 minutes just to remember the password Bridget1994 and another hour to navigate to my daughter's page. What I found there made my blood run cold. A black and white photo of a flickering candle, posted 3 days ago. Heartbroken to announce that my father Patrick O'Malley passed away suddenly. He was my hero, my rock, and the man who taught me everything about love and sacrifice. While we mourn his loss, the wedding will continue as planned. He would have wanted it that way. Rest in peace, Dad. Until we meet again, 237 likes. Dozens of comments offering condolences and praising her strength for continuing with the wedding. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the house like a coffin closing. My daughter hadn't just erased me from her wedding day, she'd erased me from existence entirely. 40 years of fighting fires teaches you one thing above all else. Panic gets people killed. When the alarm bells ring and you're racing toward a burning building, you don't think with your heart. You think with your head, methodical and precise because lives depend on it. Sitting in my kitchen with broken coffee cup fragments still scattered across the floor, I felt that familiar calm settling over me. The hurt was still there, burning like embers in my chest, but now it had focus, purpose. I pulled out the yellow legal pad I used for grocery lists and started writing. At the top of the page, in capital letters, Operation Resurrection. First, I needed intelligence. I reopened Kathleen's laptop, this time navigating more carefully through Bridget's social media accounts. The wedding hashtag was easy to find, number Bridget and Alex Forever. Each post revealed more details. The venue, the timeline, the guest list glimpses and tagged photos. Beacon Hill Country Club. Saturday, May 18th. Cocktails at 5, dinner at 7. 300 guests, according to a photo of the seating chart she'd posted with the caption, "Final head count complete. Can't wait for our perfect day." Perfect day. Without her father. I called the country club, putting on my most professional voice, the one I'd used for 40 years when dealing with fire department brass. "Good afternoon, this is Patrick O'Malley. I'm calling about the O'Malley Whitmore wedding on May 18th. I need to discuss some security arrangements." "I'm sorry, sir," the receptionist's voice carried that polished Beacon Hill accent. "We don't discuss event details with unauthorized parties. May I ask your relationship to the hosts? I'm the bride's father." A long pause. "Sir, I was briefed that the bride's father recently passed away. If this is some kind of prank," I hung up before she could finish. So Bridget had been thorough. She'd not only killed me off publicly, but had briefed the venue staff. Professional, I had to admit. Cruel, but professional. I spent the next hour researching the country club online. Staff entrance on the north side. Kitchen deliveries until 4:30. Valet parking in the circular drive. Security would be minimal. This wasn't the kind of place that expected gate crashers. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent decades breaking down doors to save people's lives. Now I was planning to break into a place to save my own dignity. My phone rang. Molly Sullivan again. "Patty, I've been thinking, if Bridget said you died, and you're obviously not dead, what kind of game is that girl playing? The kind where she wins and I disappear, Molly. Well, that's not happening on my watch. What can I do to help?" I smiled for the first time in 2 days. In Irish families, when one person gets wronged, the whole clan feels it. Molly wasn't blood, but 30 years of Sunday dinners made her family just the same. "Can you call around to the parish, let people know I'm alive, but ask them to keep it quiet for now? I don't want word getting back to Bridget before Saturday. Consider it done, and Patty give her hell." After hanging up, I returned to my legal pad. Evidence. I'd need proof of her lies, something undeniable. I started gathering documents from the filing cabinet. Insurance papers from Kathleen's death bank statements, showing the education payments copies of Bridget's tuition receipts I'd kept like a proud father. Then I found it. The letter Bridget had written me after graduation, still in its original envelope. Her handwriting, young and hopeful, "Dad, I know you sacrificed everything for my education. I promise I'll make you proud and never forget where I came from. Love always, your grateful daughter." I photocopied it carefully along with everything else. If she wanted to play this game, she'd discover that her old man had learned a thing or two about evidence preservation from his years working with fire investigators. The plan was forming piece by piece. Get inside the reception. Find the microphone. Let 300 witnesses hear the truth about Patrick O'Malley's very much alive existence. Let's see how she explained that to her Beacon Hill Society friends. 2 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table going over my battle plan when the phone rang. Bridget's name lit up the caller ID like a warning flare. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Let her sweat a little. "Hello." "Dad, thank God you picked up." Her voice was strained, frantic around the edges. "I need to talk to you about the money." "The money?" "Of course." I leaned back in my chair, suddenly enjoying this conversation more than I should have. "What money would that be, sweetheart? Don't play games with me." "The wedding fund. Mom's insurance money you promised for my big day. The venue needs the final payment by tomorrow, and Alex's parents are already covering the rehearsal dinner and flowers. We're talking $45,000, Dad. I need it wired today. $45,000. Nearly every penny of what Kathleen had left for our daughter's future. Money I'd been carefully investing for 12 years, watching it grow for the daughter who'd just murdered me on Facebook. That's a lot of money, Bridget. It's my money. You promised Mom, remember, on her deathbed you promised half the insurance would go to my education and half to my wedding. Well, I got my degree, and now I need the rest. Her voice carried that entitled edge I'd been hearing more and more over the years. When had my grateful little girl become this demanding stranger? I remember what I promised your mother, I said quietly. But I also remember what she'd think about a daughter who tells people her father is dead. Silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. What are you talking about? Her voice was smaller now, uncertain. Molly Sullivan called me 3 days ago, crying her eyes out because she thought she'd lost another old friend. Seems someone told her I'd had a heart attack. Someone organized a meal train for my grieving daughter. Someone even posted a lovely tribute on Facebook with a candle and everything. Dad, I can explain, no need for explanations. I saw the post myself. 237 likes on my obituary. Quite touching, really. Especially the part where you called me your hero. It's not what you think. I was just managing expectations. Alex's family, they have certain standards, and I thought it would be easier if you killed me off rather than introduce me. My voice stayed calm, but my grip on the phone was white-knuckled. Easier than having your embarrassing old man show up in his cheap suit. Please, Dad, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Just wire the money, and we can sort everything else out later. I laughed, then a sound that surprised even me. Sort it out later, Bridget. Do you understand what you've done? I've spent 3 days calling people to let them know I'm not actually dead. Father Murphy was ready to say a memorial mass for my soul. Look, I'll fix it. I'll post an update, say there was confusion that you're in the hospital or something. We can work with that narrative. Narrative. Like my life was just another PR campaign she needed to manage. Here's my counteroffer, I said, standing up and walking to the window where I could see Mrs. Chen from next door watering her roses. Normal people living normal lives, not orchestrating elaborate deceptions. No money. Not a dime. You can't be serious. Without that money, the whole wedding could fall apart. The country club, the catering, everything depends on that final payment. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you buried your old man. Dad, please. I hung up before she could finish. The phone immediately started ringing again, but I unplugged it from the wall. Let her panic. Let her scramble to figure out how to explain to her fancy Beacon Hill friends that her dead father was suddenly refusing to pay for their party. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was winning. Wedding week arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather Boston rarely delivers in May. Warm sunshine, gentle breeze, the kind of day that makes you believe in new beginnings. The irony wasn't lost on me that my daughter's wedding day would be beautiful, and that I'd be there whether she wanted me or not. I spent Monday morning in my bedroom closet carefully removing my dress uniform from its garment bag. The navy blue wool still smelled faintly of the dry cleaner's chemicals from the last time I'd worn it. Chief Murphy's retirement ceremony 3 years ago. The brass buttons caught the morning light as I laid it across the bed, each one polished to mirror brightness. 40 years of service, 4 commendations for bravery, 2 lives saved in the Harrison Street warehouse fire, 1 Purple Heart from Vietnam before I'd even thought about becoming a firefighter. This uniform represented everything I was proud of, everything Bridget used to be proud of too. The phone had been ringing on and off since Saturday. I'd plugged it back in Sunday afternoon, curious about the fallout. Bridget's calls went straight to the machine. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet, but I was very interested in listening to her increasingly desperate voicemails. Dad, please pick up. We can work this out. The wedding's in 6 days, and I need to know you're going to help me. Call me back. Then Monday, Dad, this is getting ridiculous. Alex's parents are asking questions about the payment delay. You're being selfish. Tuesday brought panic. The country club called. They need payment by Thursday, or they're releasing our date to another couple. Dad, you can't let this happen. This is my wedding day, but it was Molly Sullivan's call Tuesday evening that made everything clear. Patty, I've been making calls like you asked. The whole parish knows you're alive now, and let me tell you, people are not happy with that girl, Mrs. Flanagan said she wasted $20 on sympathy flowers. Father Murphy's talking about having a serious conversation with Bridget about bearing false witness. What about keeping it quiet until Saturday? Oh, we're keeping it quiet from her, don't worry. But the Irish grapevine is buzzing. Half of Southie wants to give you a standing ovation, and the other half wants to give Bridget a piece of their mind. Wednesday morning, I took the uniform to Murphy's Cleaners on Broadway, the same place I'd been taking it for 20 years. Old Eddie Murphy, no relation to the chief, looked up from his pressing machine when I walked in. Paddy O'Malley heard you came back from the dead. Must be some story there. Long story, Eddie. Can you have this ready by Friday? I need it perfect for Saturday. Eddie examined the uniform with the reverence it deserved. Special occasion, you could say that. I'm crashing my daughter's wedding. He grinned, showing teeth yellowed by 60 years of cigarettes. Well then, we'll make sure you look like the hero you are. Thursday evening, I sat in my living room with my evidence folder going through everything one more time. Birth certificate, proving I was very much alive. Bank statements showing the education payments. That letter from Bridget thanking me for my sacrifices. Screenshots I'd printed of her Facebook death announcement. Molly's grandson had helped me with that part. The folder felt solid in my hands, weighted with truth. Saturday morning, 300 of Boston's finest would learn exactly what kind of daughter abandons her father. They'd hear about the nurse who died too young, the firefighter who sacrificed everything for his child's future, and the ungrateful girl who repaid that love by killing him off for social convenience. My phone rang one last time. Bridget again. Dad, it's Thursday night. The final payment was due today. I had to use my emergency credit card to keep the venue. I'm maxed out. Please, I'm begging you. I know you're angry, but don't ruin my wedding over pride. Pride. She thought this was about pride. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. This wasn't about pride. This was about resurrection. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of May day that makes Boston look like a postcard. I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my dress uniform one final time. The reflection staring back at me looked like a man on a mission, which I suppose I was. The drive to Beacon Hill took 25 minutes through light weekend traffic. My old Ford pickup looked distinctly out of place among the BMWs and Mercedes lining Commonwealth Avenue, but I'd driven through worse neighborhoods on fire calls. Rich folks bled just like everyone else when they needed saving. The Beacon Hill Country Club sat behind wrought iron gates like a fortress of old money, all brick and ivy and understated elegance. Valet attendants in crisp white jackets directed luxury vehicles toward the circular drive, their movements choreographed by decades of serving Boston's elite. I parked 3 blocks away, not wanting to announce my arrival too early. The evidence folder sat heavy in my inner jacket pocket, a constant reminder of my purpose. At exactly 4:30, 30 minutes before cocktail hour, I walked through the main entrance. The lobby took my breath away despite myself. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across oil paintings of long-dead Brahmin patriarchs. This was old Boston money, the kind that traced its lineage back to the Mayflower and never let you forget it. "Excuse me, sir." A security guard in a dark suit approached, his voice carrying that particular Boston accent that screamed South Shore suburban. "May I see your invitation?" I patted my pockets with practiced confusion. Must have left it in the car. "I'm Patrick O'Malley, father of the bride." His expression shifted from polite inquiry to barely concealed suspicion. "Sir, I was specifically briefed about you. The bride's father passed away recently. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Check your briefing again, son." I kept my voice level, the same tone I'd used to calm panicked civilians at fire scenes. "Patrick O'Malley Engine Company, 17 retired. Very much alive, as you can see." He reached for his radio, but I was already moving past him toward the ballroom entrance. 40 years of emergency response had taught me when to follow protocol and when to act fast. This was definitely an act fast moment. Sir, stop right there." The ballroom doors swung open to reveal 300 of Boston's finest in their Saturday evening glory. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, women in designer gowns that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The gentle hum of cultured conversation mixed with chamber music from a string quartet positioned near the dance floor, and there near the bar stood my daughter in her wedding dress. Bridget looked stunning, I had to admit. The ivory gown flowed around her like liquid silk, her red hair swept up in an elegant chignon that Kathleen would have loved. For a moment she looked exactly like the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during Sunday afternoon Red Sox games. Then she saw me. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her champagne flute slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire ballroom. Conversations faltered as heads turned toward the commotion. "Dad," the word came out as barely a whisper, but in the suddenly quiet room it carried like a fire alarm. The security guard caught up to me slightly out of breath. Ma'am, I'm sorry this gentleman claims to be your father, but get him out. Bridget's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp with panic and fury. Get him out right now. But it was too late for that. 300 witnesses had already seen the ghost of Patrick O'Malley walk into their elegant gathering. The murmurs started immediately rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Isn't that the father who died? I thought he had a heart attack. Didn't she post about his funeral? I straightened my shoulders and walked deeper into the room, my dress uniform, a splash of navy blue among the black tuxedos. Every metal on my chest caught the chandelier light, every brass button gleamed with purpose. The microphone at the head table called to me like a beacon. Time for the real resurrection to begin. The walk to that microphone felt like the longest 30 feet of my life. 300 faces turned toward me, confusion and recognition dawning in equal measure. I could hear Bridget behind me, her voice rising to near hysteria. Security. Someone stop him. He's not supposed to be here, but security hesitated. Hard to arrest a man in full military dress who looked like he belonged at a Medal of Honor ceremony more than they belonged at their jobs. I reached the microphone stand and tapped it gently. The feedback squeal cut through the murmur of voices like a fire alarm, and the ballroom fell silent except for the distant sound of kitchen staff and the string quartet who had stopped playing mid-measure. Ladies and gentlemen, I began my voice carrying the authority of 4 decades, addressing crowds at fire scenes and memorial services. I'm Patrick O'Malley, and I have something important to tell you. Dad, please don't do this. Bridget's voice cracked with desperation. She was pushing through the crowd toward me, her wedding dress rustling like autumn leaves. Everyone, please ignore him. He's not well. I pulled the evidence folder from my jacket pocket, holding it up for the crowd to see. 3 weeks ago, my daughter came to my house and told me I wasn't invited to her wedding. Said I'd embarrass her in front of all you fine people with my cheap suit and working-class manners. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw women exchanging glances, men shifting uncomfortably in their perfectly tailored tuxedos. But that wasn't enough humiliation for her tastes. I continued, my voice steady as granite. Because you see, according to the Facebook post she made 10 days ago, the one 237 of you liked, I'm dead. The murmur became a gasp. I opened the folder and pulled out the printed screenshot of Bridget's Facebook post, holding it high enough for the front rows to see. Heart attack, she said. Sudden and tragic. Posted a lovely photo of a candle and everything. Very touching tribute to her dear old dad. I looked directly at Bridget, whose face had gone white as her wedding dress. She even organized a meal train through our parish. Good Catholic folks spending their grocery money to help my grieving daughter through her time of loss. That's enough, Bridget screamed, abandoning all pretense of dignity. You're ruining everything. These people don't need to hear your sob story, but the crowd was transfixed. I saw tears starting in several women's eyes, men shaking their heads in disbelief. $45,000, I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. That's what this wedding cost. Money from her mother's life insurance saved for 12 years for this exact day. Money I earned working double shifts while my wife died of cancer money. I promised my Kathleen would give our daughter the fairy tale she deserved. I pulled out the bank statements, the receipts from Bridget's college tuition, that letter she'd written thanking me for my sacrifices. And when she came begging for that money last week, you know what I told her. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I told her no, because dead men don't write checks. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the crowd, the awful realization of exactly what kind of person would fake her father's death for social convenience. So here I am, I said, spreading my arms wide, the medals on my chest catching the chandelier light. Risen from the dead to walk my daughter down the aisle after all. Unless, of course, she'd prefer to explain to all of you good people why she buried her living father. That's when Bridget broke completely. A sound escaped her throat that was part sob, part scream of pure rage. She grabbed the first thing she could reach, a dinner roll from the nearest table, and hurled it at my head with all the fury of a woman whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. It hit me square in the chest, leaving a buttery smear on my uniform. The crowd gasped in shock at the assault, but I just smiled and adjusted my tie. Thank you for that demonstration, sweetheart. I think everyone here now understands exactly what kind of daughter I raised. The silence following Bridget's dinner roll attack lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the ballroom exploded into chaos. She faked her father's death. A woman in pearls near the front turned to her companion, voice pitched high with disbelief. What kind of person does that? I sent flowers. Another voice called out, expensive ones from Winston's 9. To a dead man's house, The murmur of shocked conversation grew louder, spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. I stood at the microphone, still as a statue, watching 300 of Boston's social elite process what they'd just witnessed. The dinner roll had left a greasy stain on my uniform, but somehow that just made the whole scene more perfect. Bridget stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her wedding dress suddenly, looking less like bridal elegance and more like a costume in a play that had gone horribly wrong. Tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice breaking as she turned in desperate circles, trying to address the entire crowd at once. "He's twisting everything, making it sound worse than it was. Worse than faking someone's death." An elderly man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo stepped forward. I recognized him from Bridget's Facebook photos. Alexander Whitmore Sr., the groom's father. His voice carried the authority of old Boston money and decades of boardroom battles. "Young lady, I've seen corporate scandals that were less deceptive than this." "Mr. Whitmore, please let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you're the kind of person who murders her own father for social convenience." His disgust was palpable. "That you took money from the man you publicly declared dead." I watched the crowd fragment into small groups, heads bent together in urgent whispers. The string quartet had given up all pretense of playing and stood clustered near their instruments, watching the drama unfold like everyone else. Waiters with champagne trays lingered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to continue serving or retreat to the kitchen. "Where's Alex?" someone called out. "Where's the groom? Good question." I looked around the ballroom but didn't see Bridget's fiancé anywhere. Smart man, probably making a strategic retreat before his family name got any more tainted by association. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, stepping back to the microphone. The crowd quieted immediately, hanging on my every word. "I think I've said what I came here to say. The truth has a way of speaking for itself." I folded my evidence back into the folder with deliberate care, each movement calculated to maintain the dignity that Bridget had just shattered with a piece of bread. "Dad, please," Bridget rushed toward me, her voice raw with desperation. "Don't leave it like this. Help me fix this." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. The little girl who used to sit on my lap and tell me I was her hero was gone, replaced by this stranger in white silk who thought love could be purchased with social status. Fix what, Bridget? The lies. The death certificate you effectively filed in the court of public opinion. The fact that you threw away 40 years of sacrifice for the approval of people you barely know. I'm your daughter. "You were my daughter," I said quietly, the words carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. "My daughter died the day she decided her father was an embarrassment to be buried rather than a man to be proud of." The collective intake of breath from 300 guests was audible. Several women were openly crying now, and I saw more than one man wipe his eyes discreetly. I walked toward the ballroom doors, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear Bridget's sobs growing louder, more desperate. Part of me, the part that had rocked her to sleep as a baby, that had taught her to ride a bike, that had held her while she cried over her first broken heart, wanted to turn around and comfort her. But that part was outweighed by the man who had watched his wife die while working double shifts to secure their daughter's future. The man who had kept every promise to a woman who couldn't keep her eyes open long enough to see them fulfilled. At the ballroom entrance, I paused and turned back one final time. Bridget stood alone in the center of the room, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk, surrounded by 300 witnesses to her shame. "Congratulations on your wedding day, sweetheart," I called across the distance. "I hope it was everything you dreamed it would be." The walk back to my pickup truck felt like floating. My legs carried me down Commonwealth Avenue while my mind replayed the last hour in vivid detail. The shocked faces, the gasps of recognition, Bridget's breakdown, that perfect moment when 300 of Boston's elite realized they'd been witnesses to a resurrection. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine, letting the adrenaline settle. Through the windshield, I could see the country club's elegant facade, warm light spilling from the windows where Bridget's wedding reception was supposed to be continuing. Instead, it was probably chaos inside. Guests demanding explanations, vendors wondering about payment. A bride without a groom or a reputation. The drive back to Southie took 40 minutes through Saturday evening traffic, but it felt like a lifetime. Every red light gave me another chance to process what I'd just done. I'd set out to expose my daughter's lies and reclaim my dignity. Mission accomplished. So why did my chest feel hollow instead of triumphant? My phone started buzzing the moment I pulled into my driveway. Word traveled fast in the Irish neighborhoods, especially when it involved someone getting their comeuppance. Patty Molly Sullivan's voice practically vibrated with excitement when I answered. Please tell me you actually did it. Please tell me you showed up at that fancy wedding and gave them all hell. I showed up, I said, sinking into my recliner and closing my eyes. Let's just say the truth has a way of making itself heard. Oh, sweet Mary and Joseph, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall. What did she do when she saw you? Threw a dinner roll at my head. Molly's laughter was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. A dinner roll? Oh, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. The whole parish is going to hear about this. After hanging up with Molly, the calls kept coming. Eddie Murphy from the dry cleaners wanted to know if the uniform had performed its duty. Mrs. Flanagan from 2 streets over called to say she'd always known there was something off about that girl with the fancy car. Even Father Murphy called to ask if I needed to schedule a confession. Apparently news of my resurrection had reached the rectory. By 9 o'clock, I'd told the story 6 times, each version getting a little more polished, a little more dramatic. The Irish love a good tale of justice served, and I was rapidly becoming the hero of half of South Boston. But when the phone finally stopped ringing and the house fell quiet, the satisfaction began to fade. I walked to the mantel and picked up that wedding photo of Kathleen and me, her smile radiant in her grandmother's lace dress. Well, Katie, I said to her image, I kept my promise about the money, though not exactly the way we planned. The silence stretched between me and the photograph, heavy with all the words I couldn't say to a ghost. Had I done the right thing, Kathleen would have been heartbroken by Bridget's lies, but she also would have been devastated by what happened tonight. My wife had been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over arguments and found compromise where I saw only conflict. I set the photo back on the mantel and noticed something I hadn't seen in years, a small framed picture that had been hidden behind it. Bridget at 6 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing my firefighter helmet that was 3 sizes too big for her head. In the photo, she was looking up at me with pure adoration like I was her personal superhero. When had that stopped? When had I gone from hero to embarrassment in her eyes? The answer came to me as I stared at that little girl's face. It wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small compromises, a gradual drift toward a world where appearances mattered more than sacrifice, where image trumped integrity. Somewhere along the way, my daughter had learned to be ashamed of the very things that should have made her proud. I tucked the small photo into my shirt pocket, right over my heart. Whatever else happened, I'd always have that 6-year-old who thought her daddy could save the world. Even if the 30-year-old woman she'd become couldn't see past her own reflection. Sunday morning came with the kind of gentle rain that Boston does best, soft and persistent, washing the streets clean. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the Herald, but found myself unable to concentrate on the sports section. Every few minutes my phone buzzed with text messages from neighbors and old firefighter buddies who'd heard about last night's confrontation. By noon, the story had taken on a life of its own. Social media, it turned out, was not kind to young women who faked their father's deaths for wedding convenience. Molly's granddaughter had shown her how to look up the Facebook posts, and apparently the internet detectives had been busy overnight. "You're famous," Patty Molly announced when she called around 1 o'clock. "That boy, Tommy Flanagan, you remember, works at the Globe now. He's asking around about writing a story. Says it's exactly the kind of human interest piece people love." I wasn't sure I wanted to be the subject of a newspaper story, but I had to admit there was something satisfying about the idea of Bridget's lies getting exposure beyond just wedding guests. And another thing, Molly continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard from my friend Rita, who cleans houses in Beacon Hill. The Whitmore family is not happy. Apparently young Alex disappeared from the reception right after your speech and hasn't been seen since. Word is his father's threatening to cut off his trust fund if he goes through with marrying her. The consequences were spreading like ripples in a pond." Part of me felt sorry for Bridget. Watching your carefully constructed life crumble in real time couldn't be easy. But a larger part of me remembered the look on her face when she'd called me an embarrassment, the casual cruelty of erasing me from existence. Monday brought more developments. Eddie Murphy called to tell me the story had made it onto some local blog that covered Boston society news. The headline read, "Beacon Hill Wedding Crashes When Dead Father Rises from the Grave." Someone had leaked a cell phone video of part of my speech, and it was making the rounds on social media. "You're a hero to working folks everywhere," Eddie said with obvious pride, standing up to those snobs who think money makes them better than everyone else. Tuesday's surprise came from an unexpected source. Father Murphy stopped by around dinner time, looking uncomfortable in his civilian clothes. "Patrick, I think we need to talk about forgiveness," he said, settling into my kitchen chair with the careful movements of a man approaching 70. I know she hurt you badly, but she's still your daughter. She murdered me, Father. Posted my obituary on the internet, and let the whole community mourn a man who was sitting in his kitchen drinking coffee. I am not defending what she did, Father Murphy said gently. It was wrong, and she'll need to make amends. But holding on to this anger, it's not going to bring you peace. I poured him coffee and considered his words. The priest had married Kathleen and me 36 years ago, had given last rites to my wife, had baptized Bridget when she was 3 days old. If anyone had the right to lecture me about family, it was him. She made her choice, Father. She chose her reputation over her father. Some bridges, once you burn them, don't get rebuilt. Maybe not, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate care. But that doesn't mean you have to keep feeding the flames. After he left, I found myself back at the mantel, looking at that wedding photo of Kathleen and me. What would she have wanted me to do? Forgive Bridget and pretend nothing had happened? Enable her lies by staying silent? Or would she have understood that sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to watch? I pulled that small photo of 6-year-old Bridget from my shirt pocket and placed it next to her mother's wedding picture. Two different kinds of love. The unconditional devotion of a child and the complicated reality of an adult relationship poisoned by lies and shame. Maybe someday Bridget would remember what it felt like to look at her father with hero worship instead of embarrassment. Maybe she'd understand that she'd thrown away something more valuable than any wedding could ever be. But that was her journey to make. Mine was learning to live with the choices I'd made and the daughter I'd lost. 2 weeks passed without word from Bridget. The initial media attention died down, though I still got the occasional nod of recognition from strangers who'd seen the story online. The Irish community of South Boston had adopted me as something of a folk hero, the working man who stood up to Beacon Hill society and won. But victory, I was learning, could be a lonely thing. I was weeding Kathleen's rose garden on a Thursday morning when I saw the white envelope slipped under my front door. My name was written across it in Bridget's careful handwriting, the same penmanship she'd used for thank you notes as a child. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper. Expensive stationery, the kind she'd probably received as a wedding gift she'd never get to use. Dad, it began. I don't know if you'll read this, but I have to try. I sat on my front steps, the morning sun warming my face as I read her words. You were right about everything. The engagement is off. Alex's family made sure of that. The deposit at the country club is gone. Most of my friends won't return my calls. I had to move out of my apartment because somehow the story made it to my boss, and apparently poor judgment in personal matters reflects badly on the PR firm's reputation. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sick. I know you probably think I'm only sorry because I got caught, and maybe that's partly true. But sitting here in my childhood bedroom, looking at pictures of you teaching me to ride a bike and cheering at my soccer games, I remember when you were my hero instead of my embarrassment. I looked up from the letter across the street where Mrs. Chen was hanging laundry on her back porch. Normal people living normal lives, not orchestrating elaborate revenges or writing letters that might rebuild burned bridges. I can't undo what I did. I can't bring back the trust I destroyed, or the lies I told. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away. It wasn't just a wedding invitation I denied you. It was recognition of every sacrifice you made, every double shift you worked, every time you put my dreams ahead of your own comfort. The letter went on for another paragraph, but my hands had started shaking. 30 years of being a firefighter had taught me to recognize the moment when a dangerous situation could either escalate or de-escalate, depending on the next decision made. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even think I deserve it. But if there's ever a chance, even a small one, that we could find our way back to each other, I want you to know I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I miss my dad. I miss the man who taught me that being proud of where you come from is more important than impressing people who don't matter. She'd signed it simply, Love Bridget, followed by a postscript P.S. I kept the photo from my first communion. You said I looked beautiful even with bedhead. I'm sorry I forgot that. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my shirt pocket next to that photo of 6-year-old Bridget in my firefighter helmet. Then I walked back to the rose garden and continued weeding my mind, working through possibilities I thought I'd closed off forever. Forgiveness, Father Murphy had said, didn't mean pretending nothing had happened, but maybe it meant allowing space for something new to grow in the wreckage of what had been destroyed. The roses were blooming beautifully this year, despite the harsh winter they'd endured. Kathleen had always said that with enough care and patience, almost anything could come back to life. Maybe even a father-daughter relationship that had been buried alive and left for dead. I finished the weeding and went inside to write a letter of my own. Just 3 lines on a piece of plain paper, Bridget. Coffee tomorrow at Murphy's Diner. 2 p.m. We have a lot to talk about. Dad, some resurrections I was learning took more than one attempt. Murphy's Diner hadn't changed in 30 years. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same smell of coffee and bacon grease. Same faded photographs of old Boston on the walls. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner booth where I could see the door-old habits from 4 decades of emergency response. At exactly 2 o'clock, Bridget walked in. She looked different. Smaller, somehow, without the designer armor and perfect makeup. Her red hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater that looked like something she'd owned in college. For the first time in years, she looked like my daughter instead of a corporate executive playing dress-up. Dad. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the menu. Thank you for coming. Coffee's still good here, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Your mother and I used to bring you here for pancakes when you were little. You always ordered the same thing, chocolate chip with extra whipped cream. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I remember. You'd let me have the whipped cream even though Mom said it would spoil my appetite for dinner. Sheila Murphy, no relation to Father Murphy, appeared with a coffee pot and 2 mugs. She'd been waitressing here since the Carter administration and had served 3 generations of the O'Malley family. Well, I'll be damned, she said, pouring coffee with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Bridget O'Malley back in the old neighborhood. Haven't seen you here in 5 years? Something like that, Bridget replied quietly. After Sheila left, we sat in silence for a long moment, both of us stirring our coffee and avoiding eye contact. Finally, Bridget spoke. I've been seeing a counselor since everything happened. She says I need to understand why I was so ashamed of my own father that I'd rather pretend he was dead than introduce him to my friends. I looked up from my coffee. And what did you figure out that I became someone I don't recognize? Someone who valued other people's opinions more than my own family's love. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Someone who forgot that the man who raised her alone was more impressive than any trust fund kid from Beacon Hill. Bridget, no, let me finish, please. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. Her Facebook page was gone. I deleted everything. All of it. The fake obituary, the wedding photos, all the posts about my perfect life that wasn't actually perfect at all. I studied her face looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized our last few interactions. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine remorse. Your counselor helping, yeah, she is. She's helping me understand that what I did wasn't just about embarrassment or social climbing. It was about running away from who I really am because I thought who I wasn't good enough. She reached across the table and pulled out a small photo. The same communion picture I'd referenced in her letter, the one where she'd said, I told her she looked beautiful even with bedhead. I want to remember this girl, she said, sliding the photo toward me. The one who thought her daddy was the strongest man in the world because he ran into burning buildings to save people. I picked up the photo, my thumb tracing the edge where it had been worn soft from handling. She was a good kid. Scared the hell out of me sometimes with how fearless she was. I want to be fearless again, but differently. Not fearless about hurting people who love me, but fearless about being proud of where I come from. We talked for another hour about therapy and consequences, and the long road back to trust. It wouldn't be easy. Some wounds take time to heal, and some bridges need to be rebuilt board by board. But for the first time in years, we were talking like family instead of strangers. When I walked her to her car, a modest Honda instead of the BMW, she hugged me. Really hugged me, not the careful air kiss greeting she'd been giving me for years. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took losing everything to remember that. I love you too, kid. Always have. Some resurrections, I thought, as I watched her drive away, happened more than once. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same rose garden where this whole story began, but everything feels different now. The roses are dormant for winter, but their roots run deep, and come spring, they'll bloom again. Sometimes that's how family works, too. Bridget and I meet for coffee every other week now. Not at Murphy's Diner anymore. We've graduated to a little cafe near her new apartment in Dorchester, halfway between Beacon Hill pretensions and Southie authenticity. She's working at a smaller PR firm now, one that values character over connections, and she seems happier for it. The reconciliation hasn't been perfect. There are still moments when old resentments surface, when I catch myself wondering if her remorse is genuine or just another carefully crafted image. But then she'll say something that reminds me of the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during Red Sox games, and I remember that healing takes time. She brought someone to coffee last week. A man named David who teaches fourth grade and drives a Honda Civic with a Red Sox bumper sticker. He's nothing like Alex Whitmore III and everything like the kind of man I'd hoped she'd find. When he talked about his students with genuine affection, and when he asked me about my firefighting days with real interest, I saw something in Bridget's eyes I hadn't seen in years, pride in where she came from. "Dad," she said, as we were leaving that day, "David wants to meet you properly. Maybe dinner at my place I could cook. Remember Mom's shepherd's pie recipe." The fact that she wanted to cook for us in her own home with a man who appreciated her father's stories, that felt like resurrection of a different kind. The media attention died down months ago, but every once in a while someone recognizes me at the grocery store or the hardware store. They nod with respect, sometimes share their own stories of family disappointment or unexpected second chances. I've become something of an accidental symbol, the working man who stood up for his dignity and won. But victory, I've learned, isn't about proving you're right. It's about being brave enough to demand the respect you've earned and wise enough to forgive when forgiveness becomes possible. Father Murphy was right about one thing. Holding on to anger doesn't bring peace, but he was wrong about something too. Sometimes you have to let people fall before they can understand what they've lost. Sometimes love means watching someone face consequences, even when it breaks your heart. Kathleen's photo still sits on my mantle, but now it's joined by a new one. Bridget and me at our last coffee meeting, both of us, smiling. It's not the same as before, but it's real. And real, I've discovered, is better than perfect any day. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned something different. Love is thicker than pride, forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to earn back what they've lost. Not everyone deserves a second chance, but everyone deserves the opportunity to try. If Patty's story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage and family bonds. Share your thoughts about family loyalty in the comments. Your stories inspire us. To hear our next tale of standing up for what's right, click the video on your screen. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories come from simply telling the truth.